So yeah, Durban was an incredible place in those days, and certainly was when I was there. And you have captured the spirit of there brilliantly. You were taking me back to my time there, but obviously more exciting times when you were there in the strike. So something else you mentioned in the article, which I think is important to focus on, is you talk about and you list a number of women. One of whom is Rose Nala, and I've met her several times because she now lives in Oxford, where I'm based, and she certainly is an impressive and incredible woman. So I've only known her obviously in her older years. Can you tell me something a bit about people like Rose, and why is it that those women were often overlooked and not really get the sort of praise that they deserve from those strikes?
Yeah, well, a little more of the background of Durban. I came into trade unionism rather than other forms of worker radicalism or, just strike movementism or something of that kind, through Harriet Bolton, who is the most exemplary trade union leader of the garment union locally. And if you would imagine under apartheid, you couldn't think that anyone in such a position with a registered union having to be a statutory body, having to live with segregation in factories and elsewhere, and the whole dominance of the apartheid state in terms of controlling which job could go where and to the races and each race and so forth. Harriet was, I have to give a tribute to her. She did exemplary job. Something that just wouldn't happen today. Halton Cheadle, my close compatriot at that time, and I went down to the Garment Workers Union to meet Harriet. And she had a small office right in a very big building. And immediately we arrived, she had a set of, let me not call them secretaries. They were real dynamos in that union. And they laughed outright when they saw these sloppy white boys coming into the union office and teased us like hell. And then Harriet told them to give us a chance to speak. And so we started talking about two stages and the revolution and all the rest of it. And she just said, look, this is the agreement we made. It was a document of about 120 pages for the garment industry, right down to button sewers and the hours of this and the millinery agreement and all the rest. We said, this is what we have. This is the job of trade unions. It's hard, it's detailed, it's not particularly exciting. But then she had some book by Mao Zedong actually on her shelf. And she said, of course, the main job is to convince everybody that we can change all of this, you see. And so we said, yeah, we're going to organize. We'll organize it. She said, she looked at me, she took out the keys of her car, she put them and she said, take my car. She had a big car, I think it was a Chev, a big white Chev at that time. The union leaders were given these, the workers liked them, and so they wanted them to live well, which is a danger, but anyway, that's it. She said, I can walk. You take this car, and every week you come back and you report how many of the unorganized workers you've organized. Right. And we'd have to report to her. And she said, by the way, you fill up the tank downstairs and sign against my name. Unbelievable. She just gave the car, she gave the place. If you wanted a photocopy, it was all available. I can't think anywhere in the world where you'd actually get that type of situation. She wanted to know what the hell we were doing. And we had mass meetings as well, and she would speak at those. But anyway, so in other words, there was a sense that women could take leadership, and Harriet was quite well known because she led a famous strike, a strike which wasn't a strike. She called a mass meeting during working hours, and she had, I think, 99.9% of the workers turned up. This was in late 1971, and the police and the public labor department wanted to prosecute her for a strike. Anyway, she had some advice on that. And when they challenged her, she managed to get an advert into the newspaper, which is totally illegal, by the way. But she knew the workers who ran the union of the chapter, the local branch in the Natal Mercury. And they said, look, we can't do this, Harriet. She said, just do it. and she wrote wanted slave labor in the garment industry. That caused absolute consternation. And no one, I mean, everyone knew Harriet after that. So look, that was the part of the tradition. So when workers were pouring, black women workers were pouring into the garment industry and elbowing their way, if that's the way I'd put it, with June Rose, because you don't mess with June Rose. You either get messed up or you stand aside and let her move. A tremendous woman. And she took over the looms. Women were kept to the spinning or to the sewing. And she wasn't going to accept that. She wanted to get onto looms and weave blankets. And even today, she would know all the details about the woof and the woof and how many picks you would get, how much money you would get for how many picks and all the rest of it. And she was fighting an established patriarchy within each factory, where we knew the guys were not too keen on women coming in. And so they gave her all the worst threats, they gave her all the worst jobs and so forth, but she fought back. In the end, the local manager was quite scared of her. He was a colonial manager from Indonesia. He had some Dutch background, and he was as nasty as any of them. But June Rose got him so perplexed that he was actually quite scared of her. I don't think it had ever been had ever been spoken to by a woman with any authority, and he was a black woman giving him hell. So that was the situation in her factory. That was called Afritex. We were not allowed. The union was not allowed to organize. I mean, she organized internally. But Harriet and Holt and Cheadle, who I mentioned, broke into that factory at lunchtime, elbowed aside the security guard, and went in and had a mass meeting in the communal hall where the workers were eating their lunch. And June really rose after that. She was amazing, dynamic leader. Taking over the garment, the textile union, and then later, after being detained, actually taking over the metal and allied workers unions. We had some celebrated figures. I just want to mention ahead now. Now you can hardly find a single woman in the union bureaucracy, and there's no doubt. When it was difficult, when it was hard, when there was not much money, in fact, there was almost zero money at times, you would just survive, during those times. Now it's a plush job with a car attached and all the rest of it. The males want to take over. Look, there's no doubt. I mean, that's oversimplifying. But June Rose and Tokozo Mbele, I could go into a case, were elbowed aside. And they were, I have to pay tribute to them, outstanding organizers. In Tokozo, just to mention, I came back in 1990 and started organizing dock workers with her. And I asked the dock workers, how come you'd like a woman organizer? I was just being a little bit naughty and trying to find out what was really going. They said, listen, she turns up on time, she does her job, and she doesn't touch the money. What more could you want? By the way, she was a very good negotiator too. So so we had women organizers rising and able to organize an almost all male section like the dock workers and do a brilliant job at it. But all praise to June Rose. She had the spirit and the energy to build a union at a very difficult time. Just remember this: at that time, women shop stewards would be carrying thousands of rand. I mean, the equivalent of, let's say, today, of maybe $10,000 in a bag, and walking through the townships when you had robbery was quite the norm, and let's say also abuse of women and all that, just name calling or anything of that kind. And our shop stewards would walk without anybody touching them. You didn't touch that money. It wouldn't be worth your life. The workers would be furious, and you would have your sentence pretty much from the workers themselves. So we had that kind of mood. It was tough. counting the pennies was a pain. I mean, almost had to do a whole day of that just to sort that out, but making sure it got in the bank, all these little details which are part of a real trade union, not always very glamorous. But people like June Rose and others were even thought. I don't want to use the word thought leaders. She would want to know what a bureaucracy is. She'd want to know what nepotism is. She'd want to know what patriarch is. So all the bigger ideas were from June Rose. I don't think actually even did a high school. And in the end, she lectured. She developed a workers' college. She led unions. I mean, this is the stuff in which the struggle is made of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can see now why you referred to a sort of university of life, a university of struggle in that article about the strikes that no university, a curriculum that no university could create because people learn so much. And there's some great examples of that. And as you say, Rose went on to found, the Durban Workers' College, which is well known around the world. I just wanted to quickly jump ahead a little bit because in your article you mentioned obviously the Soweto Revolt in 1976, which obviously became well known around the world in a way that probably the Durban strikes didn't initially. But you didn't mention the sort of what I think in some quarters are well known as the Frelimo rallies in Durban and in Johannesburg in 1976. And you mentioned earlier, speaking to Steve Biko and working with Steve Biko. I just wondered what you thought about, those rallies, because some would argue that they were the sort of the height of the Black consciousness movement. And I wondered if there was any political links between the work you was doing and, the people around the Frelimo rallies.
Well, we always looked to unite all and struggle. And I personally had one-to-ones with Steve, who was operating from, I think it was the Congregational Church. Anyway, he took over. He took over that church. It was a bit dilapidated, but that was his office, and invited him to send over young activists, from the BC tradition. Although we worked within the Congress tradition, because that was most of where the workers felt they were, definitely the doors were not closed. And one or two came in, although I must say they didn't stay in the meeting because it's actually pretty humdrum. It's not mass meeting stuff. But we were very interested in developing a bigger movement and in challenging the state. The difficulty was coordination. If I think about the struggle and about, my own life, there was discontinuity, spontaneous, unity on something, and then amazing discontinuity because you had bannings, people coming in, arrested, and so forth. It's actually hard to pull a single rope of struggle and say, look, there it was, and it all tied up together. But those different strands all wove together. So I would say that Black consciousness was not central in the rise of the 73 strikes or the rise of the unions, but the idea is that Black people could take command of their own lives, which is what Black consciousness was putting, and that the civility and deference was a thing of the past. That was all in the air, if I could put it this way. It was part of the DNA of that struggle. There was one strand in that DNA. And it, the pro-Frelimo rally, by the way, I was banned by then, so I wasn't there. Well, maybe I could have been there, but I would have been inside for a couple of years. Many of our workers, you can look at the photographs. I can see, many of our workers were present. We all celebrated Frelimo coming to power. Rick Turner started to read, to learn Portuguese because he thought that was the next thing to happen. Anyway, there was a universal enthusiasm. It didn't quite all tie up in an organizational sense. And I think a lot of Black consciousness wasn't really organizational. Even the 76 uprising, Who knows who said what to whom and how it was all organized. But because basically I wouldn't believe a lot of that because, you know, it's not the way it happened. People would be drinking together, would talk together. The idea would be put out, and then spontaneity. That, you know, spontaneity, I don't want to worship spontaneity, but boy, after the fug of, you know, conformity, what a breath of fresh air. Where you have workers, you know, marching down the streets. You've got the pro-Frelimo rally just taking place, even though the police had banned it. And even the editor of the Daily News was arrested for daring to report that, by the way. Do you know, a white editor was held for 3 days in prison for daring to report that. So there was a sense that that was the good side of the Liberals, if I could put it that way. For once, they were opening up a bit. Later on, whoa, what a nightmare it was from the Liberals. I mean, they became the rock-hard right wing of South Africa and involved in covering up on all kinds of the most disgusting things. But at that time, you know, freedom was in the air. And we should have been, let's say we should have been a bit more, but look, I wouldn't say we were beleaguered, but boy, that attention to detail it can be narrow and bureaucratic. On the other hand, if it wasn't there, you're not there. You know, the workers had a complaint. It's very specific. It's about being working 47 hours, not 46 hours. And you know, you think, oh, what the hell, you know, and you fight it and fight it. And it seems that it's just 1 or 2 people involved, and suddenly the whole factory is involved with it. And that 1 hour, that extra cleaning up time or something else became all the difference. Everyone joined. Sure. And you know, you thought it was just a frivolous little extra thing. Now, unfortunately, the big idea, if you're going for, let's change the whole of society, you know, immediately, it's you need to have that. But if you do not, you know, use your little finger as well and give attention to those statutes and God knows what. We used to win factories by insisting on toilet paper there and writing letters to the employer and saying we're going to prosecute them and they would be fined so much. And they'd even have a criminal record, by the way. You know that South African law even then is criminal not to do that. And we warned them and so forth. And suddenly they would buckle under. They'd fight back again, of course. But, you know, at least we'd get a victory here and there and you'd win a factory or two. So all of that combination was what's so difficult to achieve, especially with discontinuity as a band. You know, my union career, I think, was maybe 10 months, maybe 12. I'm not too sure if I look at it now. You just get in, you're just getting the hang of it, and suddenly, you know, there they are grabbing you and dragging you out and throwing you out on the pavement. Now, who's coming after you? You've got workers. I'll mention some of the names. You know, Wiseman and Barley. He's a guerrilla leader, actually, in a factory. I mean, I never had a chance to talk to him, you know, but his view was, Dave, I think I want to go back to the countryside. The chief's in the way, he's giving us a hard time. I think we should just kill him. And, you know, he's insisting on us putting up fences and doing all these things. He's carrying out the job of the apartheid state. There's no problem. We can sort him out. And that was the mountain tradition. And I said to him, Wiseman, please, I'll get you those damn fencemen here. And I gave him some money for that. And I said, just do it and come the hell back because we want you as a union leader. You'll see. If you go through the photographs, you see Wiseman and Barley leading every strike there, and leading women workers, working with women work, even though I'm sure he's a patriarch in his own manner, overcoming that through the struggle and leading on. So you had all these different elements coming together, that kind of insurrection, even the rural insurrectionary movement, that mood being right in the unions. Difficult because he maybe he did 2 or 3 years at school, but his thinking was advanced. His courage was exemplary. No one could you know, beat him on that. But then when it comes to the attention to detail, well, you know, you've got to have a combination to put all that together.
Yeah. Okay, great. Wow. Again, it's just so fantastic to hear from you, having been in the sort of heat of the struggle, because it really gives a sense of what it was like at the time. And you mentioned something about lessons there and learning. So just last 1 or 2 questions, if I may. obviously now looking back, it's common to say that Durban and maybe the Durban dock workers strike a year or two before were key turning points in sort of, I guess, breaking that sort of period where the ANC had been crushed, and in some senses, people were in prison. There was lots of people haven't been forced underground, and the sort of Durban strikes and the dock workers strikes and the strikes you've talked about broke that sort of era. Looking back now, how do you see it? How do you evaluate it?
Well, look, first of all, I think it was the ground moving. The earth was moving. No one was prepared to put up with the kind of oppression and exploitation thereafter. I mean, imagine this, but look at the vision. The workers wanted double the wage or treble the wage. No trade union would imagine that. The ANC didn't support that. The Communist Party never thought of that as putting that as a way of mobilizing hundreds of thousands, not even one or two, or a little guerrilla faction or something of that kind. So it was immense. But what we lacked, well, of course, we were, I'd say modest, yes. I mean, sometimes we didn't think we were modest, and maybe we weren't. But we should have really crystallized those demands and put forward a democratic agenda and a class agenda tied up with democratic demands at that time. It was possible, but because we were young, it was bewildering. You had mass movement, had a strike here, a strike there, a mass meeting here, a mass meeting there. I mean, there wasn't that little inner nucleus to pull it all together. If we had, I think we would have leapt over the stage. I was in touch with people who, politically, who were not exactly in ANC cadres in that sense. I mean, they were in the Congress tradition, but they were interested in a workers' party. Every black political party which started at that time within the KwaZulu side called itself a Labour Party. Can you imagine? I mean, I know they were complete fraudsters, but they thought that was you'd have to be a Labour Party if you were going to represent the people. Yeah. So, that was very much in the idea. Now, I never knew that Oliver Tambo and that the ANC was supporting Buthelezi at that time. I never dreamed that actually was the case. The evidence was there, actually, when we look back on it. His uncle was the person who was firing our dock workers. He was completely involved in the apparatus of repression at that time. He was polite to us, well, polite to the whites among us. He was always polite to whites, but very nasty indeed towards aspirant young black trade unionists. Alpheus Mtetwa, a brilliant trade union leader who was banned, and then June Rose took his position when he was banned, was deeply humiliated by Buthelezi every time that they had a meeting. He hated the young black working class leadership, and he was determined to prove it. We never thought that this was. We had to deal with him because many workers felt that he was would be an ally. We felt we would expose that by putting demands on him to help us, but he never responded to that. And in the end, he got rid of anybody in the apparatus of KwaZulu who gave us support. So he comforted our enemies, and he was the leader in terms of breaking the anti-apartheid, were trying to break the anti-apartheid movement internationally, of endorsing the monopolies, of criticizing the ANC for armed struggle, all of that. And yet the ANC embraced him up till December 1979. And so when we were negotiating with him, at times we would meet with him. He had the authority of Oliver Tambo and the ANC behind him. We never dreamed that was the case. Now, that was a terrible, most grievous mistake the ANC made, because he was building up the apparatus to kill working class people.
Yeah,
he was definitely, from there onwards, he was declared the man of peace in the memorandum number 69 of 1969 and 1970, the Kissinger Memorandum of Southern Africa. They said, we're looking for a man of peace. Wow. And they found Savimbi and they found Buthelezi. And those were the men of peace. A man of peace was defined as someone who accepts that white people are, quote unquote, here to stay, and that any change will come about through constructive engagement with white people. Now, and Buthelezi signed absolutely on those lines. That is a very crude racist way of looking at power struggle. But he was on their side, not on our side. And the ANC somehow was involved in all of that. And the papers still have to come out about this. The CIA has kept their files closed. Even the South African state hasn't opened their files. Where are the security files and all that? We, what are all the details? All I know is it's absolutely true. And I've dedicated quite a lot of research to, proving just chapter and verse on that.
Oh, okay. And so, okay, finally, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I guess, what would you say are the key lessons then, looking back? I mean, is it possible to talk about lessons from then for today?
Oh, absolutely. Everything was wide open at that time. The discontinuities we weren't able to reason through. I can remember late night discussions with workers over forming a workers' party, and not mentioning it as an immediate issue, but actually the inevitability the working class would have to define itself, and discussing what was happening in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. Workers accepted that. They knew they'd have to have an independent workers' party. They thought the Communist Party could be it, although they had no familiarity with the Communist Party, because the Communist Party did nothing at all in terms of working class struggles. It was all about something else, and about praising the East German leader, and all kinds of things, all harking back to the 1920s. Interesting, but what about the present? So in other words, we should have always been working on that. We wanted to unite the workers and the community, which we already started with in the late 70s and early in 74. But it needed the crystallization. Unfortunately, even some of the best writing of the time never addressed those questions. So it's inevitable. We have to rise with a workers' party. That the window was open then. We should have taken it then, and that's the job in hand right now.
Okay, and just quickly, finally, there's been asking you a lot of questions looking back. Are you writing a memoir or of your life or anything like that?
Well, I return to it every so often, and then then there's always something else. I mean, at the moment, I'm trying to give priority to helping reorganize the dock workers in Durban. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Well, last time I was in Durban, workers who I thought literally were dead, it came back to life. I was able to meet with them and so forth. The personal love, I have to say, it's real affection. I don't want to exaggerate more than that, but it's, that loyalty, that gritty loyalty to working class struggles is still there. And, the emails would be, no, not that I get emails, the texts that I get from workers, Dave, please, we've got to have a real revolution here. I can't believe what I see.
Brilliant.